Painting an apple in watercolor seems very simple. So I had some fun playing around, seeing what I could do with my apple painting skills. I started with wanting to learn about an underpainting. So I painted underneath these apples. This one had green underneath, this one had purple underneath, this one had brown underneath, to see what this underpainting could do to the value and to the tone. And it was really fun to play with, but I was like, these are really basic and plain. So I decided to do some wet on wet tonals. So these I painted red first, and while they were still wet, I added the green, I added the purple, and I added the brown. That's great, that's a next level step, but then I said, that's not good enough, let's play with some actual painting of apples. So here I did some wet on wet layers combined with wet on dry layers, combined with some removals with the tissue and all sorts of things. So I'm gonna try to recreate one of these apples today and show you how I did it. Let's get started. All right, for our apple today, I mentioned we're gonna be doing wet on wet. The paints I'm using are Daniel Nicholson hand poured paints. So these are incredibly great. These are a higher quality than I often use. These are kind of my fancy paints, and they're what I was playing with when I did those practices. So these paints, I'm gonna wake up my red first. These are quite pigmented, so it doesn't take a lot of water to get them woken up. And I'm gonna move my red over here and just water it down. Now I know I've got a messy paint palette, so it might get some bits of other colors. I prefer a bit of messiness, so I'm not worried about it. I'm gonna take that very watery red and I'm gonna paint my apple shape. So I'm gonna do my apple shape is pretty much a big round shape. I'm making sure I have plenty of water because I want this whole thing to be nice and wet. And I'm gonna imagine this being kind of a more 3D apple, like you saw in my example. So we're gonna have kind of an indent at the top where we see the stem kind of growing on the inside. I'll give a little bit of a base to it, but basically it's a nice round apple shape. Now I want it to be all wet because my first step is gonna be wet on wet. So I've got this wet red everywhere. I'm gonna add a bit more of the red pigment on this side and the bottom to make sure I've got range and value. But to really push the value further, I'm going to, well, actually, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I do a different value, I want some yellow in my apple. So I'm gonna wake up, I keep changing my mind. I'm gonna wake up what's this? Yellow ochre, I believe. And I'm gonna add that to kind of a few spots on my apple. Not everywhere, but look how this just creates a bit of variety. And as I run out of that yellow paint, I'm just kind of smearing it around. So now I've got some pinkish red, some yellowish, and some nice like bold red. So I've got 3 different values by doing wet on wet and making sure that I don't mix all the colors into one new color, but I let each one kind of sit in its own area. When it comes to how much water I'm using enough water that it's staying wet, but I'm not having any puddles. There's no water that's sitting in one spot. If it does puddle, use your brush, dry it, and lift that color out. Speaking of lifting, while it's still wet, I am going to lift. See how my dry brush pulled that paint out? Kind of in this top little corner, because now I've got this nice highlight, maybe a little bit there, because I want that to be kind of this indent. If you are lifting with your brush, make sure to wash it and dry it every few brush strokes. Otherwise, you'll just put back the paint that you just took off. Because it's still wet on wet, those colors are trying to take over that spot I just lifted it out of, so I'm gonna have to do it a few times. The reason I'm not using a tissue is I don't really want it to dry completely. I'm still working in my wet on wet area, so I wanna leave it still wet without making any hard edges. Okay, now I wanna add that value, that tone I was talking about. I'm gonna wake up my brown. I'm using a raw umber, and I'm gonna put some of that brown right along the edge here. Now, part of the technique for a real realistic apple is randomness. So I'm gonna also put a few kind of stripes of this brown, or even a few little dots while it's still wet on wet, because they won't be as obvious versus when it's wet on dry, they make like a harsh line. So I put that brown in a few places, made a few strokes. I specifically included it on my shadow side, but I threw it in a few more spots to make sure I've got that variety happening. Okay, I'm gonna dry this so far and go back with some wet on dry and keep pushing it further. All right, if you ever get a little fuzz in your art like I just did, do not try to get it out when your painting is wet, or you're gonna end up messing up what you're doing. Wait for it to dry and then you can grab it and pull it off the paper. Okay, so now I've got that first layer dry. This is already looking really cool. I've got my shadow, I've got my highlight, I've got different tones and things happening, but let's push it even further. So now with some wet on dry, which means I'm gonna use my wet paint on dry paper, let's add some more layers of value. So I'm gonna go back in with some red and brown mixed together. And I'm gonna add a bit more depth to my shadow side. So I'm doing another layer over here. Now, because it's gonna create hard edges, I wanna think about a bit of randomness as well. So maybe a few little lines or brush strokes. I'm gonna purposefully kind of let my paintbrush run out of paint or even smudge and smear it so it's not perfectly striped. Part of the fun of painting realistic things is that you gotta let them be a bit random because things in nature don't happen like we want them to. So I've made some strokes. I'm gonna use the side of my brush to smudge and smush and make sure it's not, again, not perfect. This is what's gonna make your apple really come to life, is that imperfections you're doing. Now at the top of my apple, I want to create this sort of indent where that stem is gonna grow out of. So I'm creating this kind of shadow oval, but again, I don't want it to be exact, so I'm gonna dry my brush and just kind of smudge. That's too much smudging. I'm gonna clean my brush, dry it, and try to get rid of some of that. Okay, so your best friend is to learn how to control the amount of water on your brush. You'd never want so much water that it's doing things you don't expect, unless you're playing and you're having fun making something abstract. When you're painting realistic things, you need control over your water. So having a dry brush to lift up and take out water is very important. Same with being able to add water back in. So there, I've got that little dent at the top. I've got my shadow. I'm gonna go in with some more of this ochre color, maybe mixed with my red, and just add a few more marks of kind of this orange. So it's, again, wet on dry, so it's gonna have hard edges. So I'm just trying to be kind of random. I might even go through my highlight a little bit, but then if it's too stark, I just zhuzh it. I smudge it and smear it. So really embrace the art of messing up what you just did on purpose. Now I want my shadow to be even a little bit darker. So I'm gonna go back in here with more brown and red along those edges. Same with here at the bottom. I want there to be a nice dark shadow here at the bottom. Maybe I'll pull it up just a little bit. And if I want to smudge it away, I can. So a lot of times apples will have those kind of stripes or veins through them. So that's what I'm trying to emulate with this very subtle, very, very light, not a lot of water lines that go through the side of my apple. And I feel like that's showing that sort of striped texture to it. Okay, I'm gonna dry this one more time and then I'm gonna add my stem and my leaf. Okay, I'm switching to my 2 brush for my stem, just so I have a bit more control. I'm gonna again use my raw umber here. It's nice and bold brown. I think I might actually mix it with a bit of my sienna to warm it up a little bit. There I go, got a bit more of a chocolatey brown. I still want it pretty pigmented because it has to go on top of my red apple a little bit, so I'll make sure it shows. So this stem disappears into this crevice. So at the base of that shadow, that's where the stem's gonna come out. It's going to start kind of skinny, and at the top it's gonna have like a little ovally guy. So that's where it comes out. There, I've got my stem. It's coming up out of that shadow. I might actually water down my brush a little bit, dry it off, and just create a bit of a smudgy shadow with the brown in there. And actually, while I've got this small brush, I'm gonna have very, very light browns and just make a few more line stripes. So very, very subtle at this point. I say very watered down, but I don't mean that my brush is loaded with water. I mean that I've got water, I've got paint, I'm gonna dab it off so it's not dripping, and that's when I then do these really subtle brush strokes of stripes. So very subtle. You might not even be able to see it on the video, to be honest, but as they build up, they're gonna help that illusion look real. And again, while I've got this really dark brush, I'm gonna do a few actually darker, bolder stripes kind of in this shadow area that I do want to be more stark. Since it's in a shadow area, then that can be more stark. All right, I think that's probably enough for the stripes. Okay. So now I want to do that leaf. So I'm going to switch back to my larger brush. This is an 8, if I never mentioned that. And I'm going to mix up a green I like for my leaf. That's pretty much just going to be this sap green with some brown. So by adding some brown to it, it makes it just a little bit less vibrant. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of in right next to the stem. I'm going to press down and lift up. Now, it's very transparent, so it's not covering up the actual apple. So I need to kind of massage that spot where it's on top of the apple and make sure that that paint kind of wakes up underneath it, because then it will blend with my apple leaf. And then hopefully it'll look a bit more like this leaf is actually opaque and not see-through. Now, what I might do is lighten that leaf a little bit because it's all kind of dark. That's nice. And I'm gonna go in with a second layer, especially at the base here where, again, I'm trying to make sure that I can't see that apple behind it. If you ever have a transparent layer that you wish you couldn't see what's behind it, is you just have to massage that paint, because even though watercolor paint is on the paper and it's dry, it is still water soluble. You can still wake it up and you can still blend it. So I'm trying to wake up the paint that's there so that it's easier to not see it anymore. I might need to make my green a bit darker overall though to really hide what's going on there. I just want to be able to have some like veins or some texture on my leaf. So there we go. Now I've got that highlight left behind. So when I lightened it with the towel, I wanted to keep a little bit of that highlight. So when I go back, I'm painting the edges dark, but I'm keeping that little triangle line and make this leaf a little pointier. And kind of just shape it the way I want it, but that's pretty much all I need. I've got my little leaf on my apple. I could do a little shadow for it. I think I'll just do like a smudge smearish shadow. So I'm gonna grab a little bit of brownish grayish stuff, and I'm just gonna go and just use the side of my brush to kind of smudge. There, and it's not even really a shadow, it's more like a surface that the apple is sitting on. And that just makes it feel like it's grounded on the page. Not necessary. Now that I did that, man, I gotta keep poking things apparently. Now I actually want there to be a shadow because the whole surface wouldn't be that dark. So now that I gave it a surface to sit on, it's still wet, so this is wet on wet. I'm gonna now just give a little bit of a kind of a glowing shadow underneath this apple. Put a little bit of black to really get that shadow dark at the base. All right, there, I need to stop poking it. There, now I have my apple on the shadow surface. I hope that that was understandable. I will apologize, it is not super step-by-step, do this and you will get this. It is a lot of playing and learning how to use your water and your paint. Hopefully there was some logic. If we recap, we did a wet on wet technique with the red and then a bits of yellow and bits of brown, do that first layer. We dried it. Then we did some wet on dry. We added more shadow to push that value darker. We added more random shadow. So we did some lines and then we smudged those lines to make them imperfect. Back up, we lifted out our highlight way early on. So instead of leaving it open, I lifted it out with a dry brush. You could use a tissue as well, but the idea is that it's a kind of a softer highlight instead of that stark highlight that you would get from using masking fluid or from leaving the paper white. So I lifted that out. And it's just been a lot of layers of different colors and value, but really there were only 3 colors, right? Red, yellow, and brown. And then I threw in some black and green in the end, of course. But by just using 3 related colors, I can show a lot of variety, but my apple is still unified and connected. I hope you give that a try. I don't think it's as scary as it might seem, but you know, it might take you 9 practices to get it right. So it's okay if you have to practice and play a lot. I do too, and it helps me break down the concepts so that I can teach them to you more clearly. So happy painting, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.